network, the Indian Institutes of Technology, IITs, the Indian Institute of Science, IISc, and National Institute of Technology, NITs, and IISc and Indian Institute of Management are some of the institutes that are furnished with state-of-the-art infrastructure, modern libraries, and are equipped with advanced amenities like smart class computers, Wi-Fi, connectivity, etc. So the government has introduced several schemes and policies like Study in India program, which seeks to promote India as a hello. As a prime education hub for international students by inviting them to pursue their higher education in the country. So National Education Policy, Samagra Shiksha, New India Literacy Program are some of them. According to 2021 statistics, India attracted 23,439 foreign students from 174 countries, most of them from neighboring countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, etc. And India is also world's second largest source of international students after China. So according to 2022 data by MEA, over 1 crore 3 lakhs 24,000 Indian students are studying abroad. And countries where Indian students are studying include US, UAE, and Australia, etc. So moreover, the top institutions of India do not feature in the global university rankings as per Times Higher Education World University rankings. So IISc is the only university that holds a rank in the list of global universities. So we have cited some of the key factors, for the poor performance of the Indian universities. So some of them are listed here, which are only a few Indian universities come close to receiving the level of government funding provided to universities worldwide. The lack of funding is said to reflect in quality of infrastructure and teaching staff in number of higher education institutions, bearing the notable exceptions. Another field in which where we can work aggressively is improving the international research network so that research is popularized. Moreover, industry academia interface in research needs to be strengthened significantly. So, and course curriculum has also been cited as non-adherent to sector requirements. Indian universities accustomed to adhering UGC and AICTE guidelines find it challenging to meet parameters that evaluate global reputation like global diversity, international faculty, international students, research intensity, and the involvement of professors in research, among other factors. So the aim of this webinar is to discuss on how India can improve its position as a global higher education hub and address the challenges in areas like infrastructure, curriculum, faculty student ratio, etc. and what implementations can be done on both state and central government level. So to start with, I would request Dr. Vivek Suneja sir to give some context on the topic and how India should work to progress in its higher education ecosystem. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Ashima. I think that was a very, very comprehensive and sound introduction. I'm glad to be here amongst some very distinct panelists. I think this is an extremely important topic. India is supposed to be human capital rich, and we are. And we have a very large and vibrant education sector, including a very vibrant higher education sector. So it's a bit of a mystery as to why we are not leveraging our strengths and why we're not a hub. Why so many students go abroad and so few students come to India. I mean, if it was a reciprocal thing, it would be a great thing. We'd be sending students and foreign students be coming here, and that would be like balanced trade. So it doesn't mean we have to be self-sufficient in trade, whether in any industry. We export and import according to comparative advantage, and then everybody is better off. So again, in education, there should be intra-industry trade. Intra-industry means within an industry, which is the education industry. One should be trading. We should be exporting people and we should be importing people. But there seems to be a great deficit in the balance of trade when it comes to the education sector. Not many people are coming in. I think the numbers were absolutely low, 23,000. And even there, most of them are from Nepal and Afghanistan and so on. So it's not a diversified set of people. And I'm sure the panel will discuss all the various issues involved, including infrastructure, funding, our research profiles, and so forth. And I look forward to everybody pitching in. But let me just say a few words on what I think are low-hanging fruits, where one should really be working hard. So, you know, every country, every industry has some national champions, right? Certain sectors, which certain firms, we do very well. So, for example, in the IT industry, we have, TCS, we have Wipro, we have, some of the major players. And another IT, they are SMEs, but we have some champions. So the champions should be doing well. And in the Indian education sector, as Ashima mentioned, there are some champions. I mean, there are the Indian Institutes of Science, there are the IITs, there are the IIMs, places like FMS, the University of Delhi are very well known. You have ICERs and so forth. So these, if you like, are not constrained by resources in the same way as the state universities they are. So why aren't we doing better on this front? I mean, that's a real mystery. FMS draws some people, foreign students. I've just been to some of the IIMs. They also draw in some students, but nowhere in the numbers that we should be drawing. And I think partially the Trade Promotion Council of India should now also move from goods to services. So I think some promotion needs to take place of the IITs and IIMs in foreign countries, saying this is what we are. If you look at the campuses of the IIMs or the IITs or Indian Institute of Science, they're brilliant campuses. I mean, if you go to University of London, hardly any college there has the kind of facilities that these campuses have. I mean, they're hundreds of acres are IITs and IIMs, state of the art, and some great faculty. So I think we should be marketing better. And again, be more focused where we're marketing. So let's begin with places like the Middle East, where the per capita income is very high. And people from there are going to the US and UK. And let's try and get people from Dubai, and let's get from Saudi Arabia and so forth. Again, Southeast Asia, African Union. I think these are places which are low-hanging fruit. And I think that's where we should target first. Promote better, do more shows there. Maybe TPCI can help us to get people into our systems. I think there is really no reason other than perhaps lack of sufficient knowledge in the potential clientele as to what these places are. So let me leave it at that, just as a starting point. And I'm sure as we go along, we can discuss more.
Thank you, sir. So we'll start with the session with the first question to Mr. Praveen. And what are the major areas where Indian higher education ecosystem needs to transform to be at par or better than global standards? And how do you think the Indian universities can promote interdisciplinary and conducive learning environments for students in India?
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. While Professor Vivek was speaking, I was just thinking about this topic. How would I respond to this from my student days of, I studied at IIT Madras. So I was thinking, how would I look at this session if I was a student then? To someone being in the education space now, being a part of the policy think tanks. So how would I respond to it now? So there are two parts of to this answer. In my batch of 100-odd students, about 80% of them graduated after graduating from IIT Madras, went either to pursue MS in the US or got into consultancy jobs, nothing to do with mechanical engineering that I studied. Now, unfortunately, for them, and including me at that time, if I had considered getting into higher education beyond my BTech, all of us would have got carried away with this idea of which are the best institutions, and these university rankings would have played a big role there. Now, 15 years out of college, now I look back at my college life. Now I am wise enough to say that, yeah, IIT gave me everything that I would have wanted. maybe no other university in the world can actually be as good as it is, whether it is the peer group that we have, or the type of professors that we have had access to, or the facilities. If you look at the university rankings today, they are all very focused on the alumni and research and so on, but not much assessment is done on, or not much weightage is given to the peer group. And I think it's as important in calling or creating a great learning experience for students. I learned much more in our dorm rooms than being in the classrooms, in the cafeteria more than more in the classroom. So somehow we get carried away with this university ranking, which doesn't capture a comprehensive picture. So we either come up with an alternative narrative of telling what is really good at the institutions that we run. And at that, I don't think we are very good publicists, and we really need to take a couple of notches higher on that front. On the other aspect of research and interdisciplinary research that you have been talking about, the government also rolled out another policy as a draft. It has not been adopted. It's called the Science, Technology and Innovation Policy. Now, there is a chapter 4 which focuses exclusively on research there. And that chapter recognizes the fact that we could have done much better in research. It recognizes the fact that interdisciplinary research is the way forward. And it also recognizes that sometimes we get carried away with problems posed to us by the rest of the world and not focusing on what the core priority areas of our country are. So, in fact, in one of the recommendations of that policy, it says we should have a technology and innovation which has deliverables on the established priority areas of the country, which are energy, environment, agriculture, water, health, and so on. So somewhere we have to set the narrative, not go by this AIRF, the Chinese university, which comes up with this ranking of all the universities in the world. And not feel bad that only IISc figures out in the first 500. NIRF rankings by that, I think, are fairly good. But why don't we quote that as much as we quote the international rankings? So I think setting a narrative there, and also positioning our programs to the students. I had the opportunity of working with a bunch of students who come from Cornell University to our center here in Mysore. So they come for these short programs which are between their semester breaks. And they seem to believe that all of us Indians are exceptionally good at mathematics. And the notion for their belief is because we can add 2-digit numbers without using a calculator. Somehow we don't talk about this. We are fairly good at the foundational level, at the secondary school level. We are fairly good at maths and science. But we seem to be focusing more on other things, and we let others set the narratives. So I think setting a narrative is positioning our programs is of primary importance. The second thing, there is a new policy that is going to come in. There is a lot of discussion around how we create a research and innovation ecosystem in India. We have done significant work in the startup space. I think there is an opportunity for that to sort of spill over into innovation and industry pitching in money in research. One last point before I end. While you may, in the initial remarks, you did mention that there isn't as much government funding in research. While that is true, by quantum or by volume, government funding isn't much. But the government share in funding in research in India is way higher than any other developed economy, because their funding for research from the industry also plays a big role. So we should also look into that aspect of how the industry academic institution connect can be enhanced. Start with few good examples, build on that. I mean, we get carried away by the scale at which we have to work in India. But starting with few good places and then building on it, I'm sure it will snowball into a big revolution for tomorrow. Thank you. Ashima, you're on.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So my next question is for Vivek, sir. How do you view the initiatives taken by the government for promotion of higher education under Study in India program and the progress it has achieved so far?
Ashima, this is for me?
Yes, sir.
All right, okay. Yeah, so there's a lot of promise in all our initiatives, and they also talk about use of technology. And there's something I want to say there. We've had the experience of COVID. So we now, I mean, in many ways, thanks to COVID, we are having this webinar. I mean, I'm sure we have had virtual meetings earlier, but the number of meetings that we are having, including I'm sure being held by the Trade Promotion Council, have exponentially gone up thanks to that COVID experience. We got used to. I hardly knew anything about Zoom before or Google Meet and so on. But here's something that we are now all familiar with and the world is familiar with. Now, can we do education through this? So what have we learned in our COVID experience? I mean, for almost a couple of years, everybody was teaching through virtual mode. So clearly some things work, some things don't work. And I think we need a complementary mix. Virtual cannot replace face-to-face teaching or face-to-face learning because there are social aspects to learning, there's peer elements of learning, there's discipline involved. So it cannot replace face-to-face, yet it's a great complement. And of course, during COVID, one didn't have an alternative. You would have had 0 years if we didn't have these virtual modes. So thank God for that. But going forward, I think we need a blend of online and physical teaching. Now, that changes the picture when it comes to dealing with the world outside. You can do online courses. And I know places like Jindal University and so on in Delhi are offering pure online courses, and people from all over the world, for example, are taking courses in public governance and so on. And I'm told it's a fairly successful program. But also explore possibilities of complementarity. So we can have joint ventures, we can collaborations where one teacher can take a course of an Indian university and we can reciprocally take one course or more courses in the university with which we are collaborating. And then that can be complemented by visits in the summer or maybe a year. So I think these possibilities of blending are enormous. Often, if you want to do summer programs and if I want to send my students in a big way to other places, then the costs become prohibitive. Transport costs, accommodation costs. So we can do that for short periods and for some number of students. But why not, have virtual teaching to complement? I think that's something we must deeply explore, both private and public universities. So I think COVID, if anything, a lasting benefit, if we are willing to experiment and go forward, that might be one. How to use the virtual world to make India a hub for education. Back to you, Ashima.
Great. Thank you, sir. Another related question to you, sir. Again, how important is the role of technology in establishing India as a global education hub? And how are the edtech companies helping to boost the education system in India?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So the first part, I think I've already touched upon. EdTech companies, absolutely. So interestingly, India, the EdTech companies are doing more at the moment on school education, and they are now getting more into higher education. So Byju's and so on, or the other companies, I mean, that's where they began in school education. And of course, you have now them and others moving into higher education. So EdTech companies can also collaborate with universities. I think the UGC and other government regulatory bodies have allowed that possibility of collaboration that needs to be explored. So EdTech companies provide the technological competence and also help to record lectures and set up platforms, and the universities can tie up with them to deliver higher education outside. So I think that may be a fruitful area. But I again repeat that a blend to me seems important. And therefore, one should not just create virtual education. I think with AI coming in, increasingly we might get lost in the digital world unless we interact face to face. We should not become virtual beings. And often people 18 to 21s or 25s are in the formative years. So the social aspect of education should not get lost. Otherwise, intellectually we might grow, but we might lose out in our emotional, social, and moral capacities, and that's a big danger. So I think one needs to be judicious in the use of all these new emerging technologies.
Thank you, sir. So my next question is for Mr. Sanjiv. What should be the core fundamental areas of focus for Indian universities for the higher education system in India and to grow exponentially?
So firstly, thank you to all of you, and interesting discussion. So to answer your question, Ashima, so I think for any good institute to grow, you need two aspects. One is good research, and the second is good teaching when we're talking about higher education. Okay, and I will not undermine teaching. In some sense, it is equally important, when compared to research. And when it comes to developing good research, I think the key is you do something that is extremely interesting scientifically. So it could be an interesting theoretical problem, or it could be some fundamental aspect of nature that you're trying to study, or you do something that is extremely socially relevant, right? So something that is of immediate necessity for the country or for the world. Like I think, as was brought up earlier, maybe solving a problem for the environment, or maybe developing an indigenous GPS system, whatever it may be. So these two together is what creates impactful research. And when I say impactful, I do not mean the number associated with journals or rankings. So we should not become slaves to numbers. But what I mean by impactful is you've advanced the knowledge of humankind by solving this interesting problem, or you have made the life of some aspect of or some community easier because of your socially relevant technology. So this is what good research is. And teaching is to communicate everything that you know in a very lucid manner to the students who are coming in, so that they appreciate and they actually learn and develop skills. So teaching doesn't just imply you delivering the knowledge, but it should also need to be absorbed by the students, and that is also your responsibility to some extent, right? To ensure that they have developed the skills needed. So these two aspects, research and teaching, together are important. They help the image of the university grow, because the university begins to solve important problems. Its work begins to get highlighted, and its image grows. And now a positive feedback kicks in, which is when the institute's image grows, good students want to join in, good faculty want to join in, and that becomes a positive feedback, right? It just keeps growing. It's an upward spiral after that. And similarly, if things go bad, it can be a downward spiral. Now, behind all this is this important aspect of funding, right? So how do you fund all this research? These are nice things to do, but how do you fund it? To some extent, government support is necessary, okay? But it is my personal belief that apart from government support, the work coming out of this research, for example, let us say you've solved some socially relevant problem, that should lead to technology translation, and which in turn generates revenue and further knowledge and employment, and sort of strengthens the industrial base of the country, as well as brings in revenue for your research. So this ecosystem, if it is very well established, that is, you do interesting research and you fund it through the outcomes of your research. If this ecosystem is built, then you will have an exponential growth in your higher education. And it is largely in our hands. It is just that you need to act on this. Yeah, that is probably a long answer to your question.
Thank you. It was perfect. So moving on, my next question is for Buddha Chandrashekhar sir. So Indian universities currently do not figure in global rankings of top universities. So what are the areas of improvement and what initiatives are being taken in this direction?
Good afternoon all, and first of all I would like to thank Trade Promotion Council of India for this very thought-provoking Make India as a Global Hub for Higher Education webinar. Let me, put it in this way. In 18th century, 19th century, India was a Vishwaguru, and the students from various parts of the country or the world, the globe, they used to visit our universities to study. Those days we used to teach 64 different learning methodologies, including understanding the nature, understanding the trees, plants, whatnot. We used to cover every aspect of the life, human life. But slowly the teaching methodologies is changed and industrialization started, and it has overtaken the rest of the learning methodologies and rest of the processes and frameworks. And that's where the overall teaching methods is restricted to the industrialization of Industry 2.0, 3.0, and where the methodologies and the frameworks was restricted only to a 2 to 3 limited areas. So that's where, the system started doing in an opposite way. Even I as a student, I studied in US, and, then I did my entrepreneurship in US, and, and I did my research in US. And I think, the Western part, the globe of the world is dominated the education methodologies in the name of innovation as well as on the research side. But I would like to tell you one very fantastic thing. What we as a government of India is doing is a National Education Policy 2020, which basically, trying to take the lead again back into the system by, first thing is by giving a quality education, because why the student from India is going abroad to study, one of the main reason is the quality education. So is there any way we can enhance the quality education and try to accommodate all kind of content types available in the educational system, in our, education ecosystem framework? I think, this is where we are trying to, focus on. And that's where the NEP 2020 helping Indian education ecosystem to adopt the global standards by focusing various content types, on the curriculum development. Example, nowadays we are straight away developing content for AR, VR and MER. So, and we are even utilizing the advanced technologies of digital twinning. So that's a drastic difference. But in order to share this information, right, to the students in the Indian institutes, you need a better digital infrastructure. So that's where we started something called NETF. So this NETF is basically a educational technology forum, which basically accommodates and creates a digital infrastructure ecosystem for all our educational institutes, and make our institutes is industry ready, innovation ready, and research ready, and skill centered, because that's very important nowadays. If you see, there are a couple of examples, Google saying, I'm okay with whatever qualification you have, but your skill is what matters. I think the education is slowly shifting towards a skill-based education. So we are trying to accommodate and providing such kind of a digital infrastructure so that, we will again gain that momentum back, and the students from various countries will come back to our country to study. And at the same time, the laboratory is also very important. But what kind of a laboratories we are talking about? So slowly we are adopting a virtual laboratories and adopting a very advanced technologies to attract the domestic as well as international students. And another major problem in our education system, what we analyzed is this: the faculty is mainly focusing on entering the data again and again in order to get the approval or accreditation or NRF ranking, etc., etc. So now we are creating a common framework and a system where they enter this data only once, so that their 95% of the time will get on the focusing on teaching and learning. I think this is where we need to focus more. At the same time, we see one more good thing, that in last few years, we have one of the best startup ecosystem developed. Because when I was in Stanford, I used to think that maybe US has a better startup ecosystem, but slowly we picked it up. And now I see that we have a much more better ecosystem, and the possibilities of problems in India exist more and better than any other country. So if you solve for India, you can, you have that solution can be implemented across the globe. I think, this is one mantra we started selling it to everyone, so that the student from, from any country can come to our country and look into that problem, work out the variable, valuable solutions out of it, and try to go back to his country and start implementing. I think, this is another thing. And as you know, from last 8 years, we are getting billions of dollars investments in our country. And we need to have the ecosystem for industry 4.0 and 5.0. So that's where we need industry collaborations is very important. Research and innovation also plays very, very important role. At the same time, industry connections. Because what is happening, the student is coming out of degree without a practical knowledge. I think now we as a government of India, we identified this gap, and we are filling that gap in the name of national internship policy. So basically, we have created a very super fast and multilingual websites where the student, either he is a first year student or a second year student or a final year student, he will look into the internship opportunities, from various private MNCs as well as various government initiatives and government ministries and PSUs. They can apply, either they can do a virtual internship opportunity or they will physically go and work. Example, I'm sure you all see lots of students working on the national highways, right? They all utilized this national internship portal and started picking the internship opportunities and gaining the industry knowledge and the practical knowledge when they are in colleges. So this is the beautiful, initiative what we have come up with. And on the other side, as we have lots of edutech companies who has a high quality content. But our average Indian student is economically on a below average, on a mid scale. So we are trying to tie up with them and encouraging them and giving them a platform so that, we are negotiating the price factor from the content point of view. And we are trying to distribute that high quality, globally accepted content to all our students, irrespective of their location. Because as you know, most of the students from our Indian side, if you see 80% or lives in villages or tribal areas. So their language of instruction or, the better understanding of the language is their mother tongue. So what we are doing is, we are taking the existing content which is accepted in global in nature, and we are creating books, digital books. One side in English, the other side is in the mother language, their mother language. So what happens if we don't understand English, or if we are facing difficulty to understand, they can read the content in local language and they can understand. See, that is where you are increasing their understanding level, their knowledge level. You are allowing them to be skillable and employable. So these are the couple of initiatives what we have taken. And luckily we understood another thing, that the credit system, what we have, is not globally accepted. So now we are upgrading our credit system so that, any course you do and the credit you get in India is equivalent to the global credit framework. So that what happens, the foreign student who comes to our country to do a short-term courses will get an equal credits of the course, if he is doing in any other country, but with a lesser price. I think, we need to identify the USP first. So we have identified 5 to 6 such USPs and trying to attract the students, not only from the infrastructure point of view, We are even giving them the frameworks like yoga example, which is very, very important for any human being, and how to focus and solve the problem. I think, yoga has all this kind of a solution. So that is again one of the USP for our country. And as I said, the problem statements, the industries are pouring into our country. And in after Corona, if you see, right, in the entire world, India received the highest investments. So, but where are the resources to work on it, right? So we have those resources in the name of the students. So that's where, we are trying to transform the students into a professionals when they're in college. So this is kind of a models which we are working. And I'm sure that, this is a continuous improving process. And sometimes, I don't believe in this ranking system, global ranking, because their benchmarking parameters are different than our benchmarking parameters. And trust me, if you see most of the companies, CEOs, CTOs, vice presidents are Indians. Why? The reason is very, very clear that, we are the best of the best human beings born in this world. The only problem is, we are not sharing the information to our fellow students and we are not guiding them in a right way. I think that's where we are trying to, as a government of India, we are trying to fulfill that gap and trying to, churn more. And the beauty of this national education policy, what I liked, because I worked on national education policy, US government, and I analyzed various, I think more than 18 countries' national education policies. But the beauty of our education policies is agile in nature. So we have received so much of inputs, we incorporated, try to understand, the end user, the consumer is in the form of the student, in the form of a faculty, in the form of institutions, in the form of parents, because your parents also play a major role. So now slowly we are fine-tuning all our systems to not only make it a global standard, but, give what our end consumer wants. I think, that, and at the same time, the technology plays a major role. So we started utilizing the advanced technologies, and now we are coming up with something called ER, which basically creates a Aadhaar for education. For every student, they will get one unique ID, like Aadhaar ID. So you can name it as an education ID or edu ID. So what happens now, I will track the performance of the student. So I know whether is he interested in a research or is he interested in innovation or is he interested in startup or is he interested in entrepreneurship. So once I know, then what happens, I can guide, I can put example, Vivek ji, he's a researcher. So what I can do, I can take an artificial intelligence student and connect him with Vivek ji so that he will guide. He will basically, mentor them. I think these entire dots are getting connected now. And I see that, in next year or so, then again we will go to the position where the most of the millions of students will pour into our country to have education as well as, the industry experience.
Thank you, sir. That explains the question very well. So thanks again. So my next question is for Mr. Praveen. How can Indian institutes enhance research and innovation promoted at international levels? Because that's a challenge today we face. So over to you, sir.
I'll take a shot at it, but Sanjiv ji would be the best person to respond, being from an Indian institute himself. A couple of quick thoughts before I request Sanjiv ji to add. One thing is, modern science and research has clearly demonstrated that collaboration is the way forward. You no longer find single author research publications in Nature or Science, and I think those days are far behind us. Collaborating with cutting-edge research institutions across the world and also complementing it with necessary infrastructure. I think that the second part of it, we are able to make some progress. So making more and more collaborations, and then the results will speak for itself, and then the students will come. So the starting point would be working with peers, understanding what they are doing, understanding where we can contribute. That would be the first step in that direction. Sanjiv ji?
I completely agree, Praveen. So I will go back to the 2 points I mentioned, which is for good research. You need to be solving either a very interesting problem that is going to push the boundaries of knowledge, or we have to be solving a very socially relevant problem. So interesting problems nowadays comes through interdisciplinary research. I mean, you have to have a biologist talking to a physicist and maybe talking to a computer science engineer, for example. And you will see that, the boundaries of science get pushed very quickly and in a very interesting direction once that happens. And that is primarily the answer to, doing interesting, defining interesting problems and solving them. But the other one, which is to solve problems relevant to society, I will go through it another way. And here too, it's in some sense interdisciplinary. So here you need to look at it from the point of view of the layman, right? You must ask yourself, what is the real problem he has? It should not be that you have done something in your lab and then you're going to find a solution out in society. You're looking for a target where this bullet trajectory would go and, fly by. So it should be the other way. You need to go out into the world and see what is the real problem, understand the problem very well, do a case study on it, and then work yourself backward as to see in what way you can contribute to solving that problem. It could be that there is a village, it's got plenty of groundwater, they just do not have a rope to draw the water. So that's it. The solution is a rope. It may not be cutting edge science, but then you've done something very useful and important. You can make a rope made of a very fantastic material, but you've actually solved the problem. So these two have different approaches, but both of them ultimately contribute to you doing interesting work. And interesting work is what builds the image of and the reputation of an institute. And that reputation, as I told you, will result in positive feedback. It brings in funding. Many more people will want to engage with you. And I think with these new ideas, very exciting ideas mentioned by Dr. Buddha, about the NEP, I mean, these things are very helpful. Students will be more mobile. It makes it a lot more friendly for students. And overall, the whole environment will grow. So I think in some sense, I will underline what Praveen has said. I think this is the answer.
Yeah, ma'am, I just want to pitch in because see, I see when industrialization started in the world, right? So these European nations and US become a research hub. They used to research, and the production happened in China. Right, I think we need to remember that one very crucial thing, that now the entire world become a global village. I think this industry collaboration and internationalization, of our universities are very, very important. I will give you one example. I did my MBA from Maryland University. So one side of the road, I used to finish my MBA class, and the other side of the road, I have an industry. So all I need to do is just cross the road. I think why our institutes don't have industries inside our campuses, I think, that's again one more fundamental question, because we are treating these as a two different individual entities which are not. I think our universities needs to understand, as well as, fine tune themselves as the research hubs and the startup ecosystems. That's what the universities means. I mean, when I say universities, the entire higher education ecosystem. And the industries needs to be a part of it. I think, that's where you will get the best of the best. And whenever, the Honorable Prime Minister envisions, he always talks about, producing millions. Why don't we produce millions of teachers? Why don't we produce millions of automobile engineers? Why don't you produce millions of artists? Why don't you produce millions of nurses? For this, I think we need to make sure our universities, thought process of our universities needs to be realigned towards a research, innovation, and startup hubs. Let the creativity flow, everywhere. Yeah, sometimes, the another biggest disadvantage, we disappoint the failures. I think, the failures are the one, which is basically teaching you how to succeed. I think we need to allow, I think, this kind of a little mindset reframing, right, is very, very important. That's the only fundamental difference between other country universities and us, because there also the professors are Indians. I mean, if you go to any famous, I'm sure Vivek ji also agree with me. Sir, big university you go, you see, the deans and professors, most of the assistant professors are Indians. So what is the fundamental difference? The only fundamental difference is the thought process, what we are implementing in our country, because we are seeing the industry as a separate entity than an educational institutes. I think we need to have a union between these two, then automatically things will be in place and the student will focus on the research. Then the, something called, Ratta Marna, I mean, that became a biggest hurdle for us. Because people feel that we are very best of the best in mathematics because, we have that kind of a brain in us. We will mug up anything. I still remember so many in my engineering first year, second year mathematics, which was very difficult. So what I used to do, just Xerox it here and paste it there. I mean, finished. I finished my mathematics class and, just moved on. I think this is where the problem is starting. I mean, we must accept there are gaps in our education system which we need to fulfill. But at the same time, how? I mean, they're using the technology. Sometimes maybe the industry, like a big heavy industry, can't be a part of the education institute, but there the R&D center can be. So I think, this kind of a fine tuning of a thought process is required. I mean, that's what I feel, because you need to have millions and billions of fund, for a research investments. I think these international collaborations, as well as having a small center of excellences in the institutes, will definitely make a difference. I hope, I answered the question.
If I can add to that, Ashimaji,
Yes, sir, sure. I was
so
about
just to
ask.
carry that conversation forward, I think all the distinguished panelists, a lot of thought-provoking stuff here. Two aspects, perhaps I can say something. One, on creativity, pedagogy, and so on. So with AI coming in, and we've seen what ChatGPT can do. It's cleared the US medical exam. It's cleared the bar exam. It is coding, which is a big threat to the Indian IT industry. We'll have to upskill our coding abilities and move into more product-oriented and higher process-oriented coding. Low-level coding, which generates a lot of dollars for us, might be taken away and rather quickly. So there's an immediate challenge. Now, AI is not capable of truly creative work. It can synthesize, it can rehash, but it's not I. I only comes from sentient brains, because we have consciousness and machines do not have consciousness. But are our students creative? So if we're going to become a hub for the world, first we have to also become creative at our own ends. And I think there's some systemic problems. One, there's this hyper competition to get into quality institutions. So we have huge number of colleges, huge number of 1,000 universities, but not are at the same, for various reasons, for funding reasons and various reasons. They're not all at the same level. That generates enormous competition to get into the IITs, the top IMs, and so forth, FMS and other places, ICES and Institute of Science. And so you have hyper competitive exams. And I've noticed students come out fatigued. I often think in India, you need to clear 3 exams. I mean, if you're in a business family, that's different. If you're in a service, born in a service family, you first get into nursery school. That's a hyper competitive exam. Then at the end of class 12, you either crack a board exam, or now we have a central university education test, or you crack the NEET for medicine, or CLAT for law, or the JEE for IT. So that's another exam. And then you clear one more exam at the end of that. IAS, maybe banking, CAT to get, So 3 exams, and then you get placed. And at each level, there's hyper competition. And often these exams are of increasingly objective nature. You multiple choice, you don't write much, because how do you score people in an objective way? That was the problem with CBSE. That's why you moved to a central university education test, where you just tick, even in subjects like English and history, which is a bit odd, but just to standardize things. But students get tired. So if you notice people, I mean, after they've cracked the JEE for the first 2 years, those of you in IT would you want to take it a bit easy. People come to FMS or the IMs and they've cracked a hyper-competitive CAT and they're more interested in placements. So that's one problem. So we'll have to expand the number of quality institutions so that people get more time it's not so hyper-competitive that you can't have creativity. That's one. The other is misalignment of incentives. So as was being mentioned by one of our panelists, and I also saw an interview by the IIT director of Madras, Chennai, recently, where he mentioned that, look, so much resources are getting wasted because engineers, and then either you go to the US, but often you end up in the IMs or doing an MBA and then selling soap, or getting into derivatives, which are in companies selling soap. So you're not using your core engineering skills which you've spent so much time in. And that's partially because unlike, say, Germany or Japan, and because R&D is not sufficient in our Indian industry, if you look at the career paths of engineers and managers seem to earn far more and far quicker than engineers. So engineers want to take and do MBAs here or abroad and get into a different line. And again, that's a misalignment of incentives. So you need a systemic change on that front. Finally, I think the way we teach in general, and I think this is a big challenge. To do school education, you have to do a B.Ed. But if you want to teach in universities, yes, you do a few courses, but you don't do enough in pedagogy. How best to teach? Is it through a PowerPoint? Is it through group discussion? Is it working on projects? And I think more than school level, despite the B.Eds, because of large class sizes and so forth, and at higher education, I think not enough participative learning is taking place. And that is going to have an effect on ability to be creative. I don't know what others think, but where I am, and increasingly I get reports from elsewhere, other IMs and so on, students are often bored. There's too much information, there's too much messages coming from the mobile phones, they're too distracted, attention spans have become shorter because of digital world. And true curiosity, which should be mentioned either from their frontiers of work or doing some socially relevant work, true curiosity is slowly a casualty. So we need to do something, the way we teach, the way we engage, maybe as was suggested with industry, with society at large, and judicious use of technology. So technology is great. I mean, this conversation we have is aided by technology. And it's also saving us carbon credits. We're earning some carbon credits. We all had met. On the other hand, if we had met, we would have had coffee together. We get to know a little more about each other, and that might have led to other things. So I think some blending, and we are on a learning curve here. And companies also experimenting with work from home and also coming in. And I think education sector also needs to do that. But with AI coming in, creativity is absolutely key. One last thing. Tagore had set up Shanti Niketan. He called it, an Eastern university, where he said we'll marry the best of the West and the East. So we'll have science from the West, but we'll have aesthetics and drama and music and emotional bonding and the joy of the earth, the joy of nature. That is why he founded Shanti Niketan in a naturally beautiful place, which is now Vishwa Bharati, so that will be close to nature. In the old days, you would be taught under the tree, and the guru would have 10 or 12 students. The teacher-student ratio would be far better. And I think learning close to nature. And finally, as Bertrand Russell put it, without affection, without, in the business world, we don't use the word love very much, nor in a business class. But without affection, between the teacher and students, between students, all learning is sterile. It's only an intellectual affair. So unless there's affection, there's joy in the classroom. It's not just a thing of the head, but also the body and the heart. And that's where we need to tell the world that's holistic education. Something NEB talks about, but to put it into practice is going to be a big challenge. But I think we should be doing that. That should be another area where we should tell the world, look, we have a tradition here, we're reviving it, joyously sharing, close to nature, using technology, but not being dominated by it. So just some food for thought.
So if, Dr. Vivek has brought up some interesting points, if I might just add a sentence to each. Sorry if I'm taking away too much time, but so very interesting point regarding creativity. I completely, and it's where the mind connects with the soul in some sense. And for that to happen, you need to keep your mind extremely silent, in the sense that it's not that you yourself away from distraction. It's a different level of silence. Where the mind actually, looks at everything. And for creativity to grow, the food that is needed is you diffusing. I mean, as a student, when a student goes, let me talk in terms of science and technology again. When he goes and takes plenty of courses, okay, he may not learn much from it, but he has that pool. He's got all the resources in his mind. And one day when his mind is very quiet and he just engages with himself, he will pick up different pieces of the puzzle and something new comes out. I mean, this is how it generally works for me, but I'm assuming that it should not be very far from how it would work for others. And it's an extremely important aspect of research or any thing that you want to develop. With regards to teaching, one of my colleagues, in fact, me and my friends, we often practice this. We teach on the board as opposed to flashing slides. And it generally, we find that it's much more effective. And my colleague had a very interesting reason, and I completely agree with him, which is that when you write on the board, the students have time to absorb what is written. There is a time constant, as opposed to you flashing a million slides where the student is just two-faced. When you write, the process of you writing, the process of the human involvement and the time it takes allows the student to absorb. And we use this to great extent. Even though we have plenty of slides to project, we do not teach that way. We use it. We teach by writing. And similarly, even for online teaching, you can actually take out a pad and write on the pad as opposed to putting out presentations. So these are just some two thoughts I wanted to add, Dr. Vivek, because he brought up these important points.
Sanjiv, very quickly, I mean, that's most fascinating. Just on your handwriting point, I do exactly the same. And even if I'm doing a PowerPoint, normally I think in a PowerPoint, neither is there's too much power nor any point, because, you're doing, as you said, flashing away PowerPoint after another. But I think also maybe because our earliest civilizational advance was making tools, and they use hands to make tools. That's what distinguished man from the animals, right? Everything else followed. Right. So our thumb is opposed to our finger. So when you write, I think, as opposed to when you type, I mean, whenever I do really creative stuff myself, first I mean, maybe we're old guys and we're not born, with these nimble fingers and smartphones. I don't know. But when you write, it exercises the brain in some way which typing doesn't. So when you're writing, and your students are also copying, if they are writing, right? Because they might open their notebooks.
Yes.
Then I think there's a two-way, tool being used, the pen, rather than,
Yes, you're engaging many more of your senses.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes. So I think that's absolutely bang on, which is the point I was making about pedagogy in general. We are expected after to do a PhD. How do they become professors in higher education? You don't do a 2-year B.Ed. You do your masters, you do your PhD, publish whatever, and then you go to class. And yes, UGC or whatever might have some orientation courses, but really, what works? For example, this little point, right? So if this was shared, right? And I'm not suggesting we should have a kind of a B.Ed or necessarily, but some exposure to pedagogy and sharing. One last point on sharing. We're talking about sharing with foreign universities. How about sharing within the nation? How little of that is happening? I went to IIM Indore just a week ago, and I asked them how much sharing is across the IIMs, right? After all, now there are new IIMs in every state. And they said hardly any. how much sharing is there within IIMs and IITs or between, across various, there's so many universities, right? For example, this conversation, I mean, this is a brilliant shared conversation. So we are the world's largest nation, of course, population-wise. We are 1/6 of humanity. So in population terms, there are only 6 nations. There's China, and the rest are the others. So we're huge. We should be thinking of ourselves, we in the world. We're 1/6 of the world, right? And each state is like, this is the Indian Union, like the European Union, right? So we should be talking to each other, sharing with each other, sending students to each other. Forget students going abroad. Students from Delhi should go to Karnataka, and from Karnataka to Bengal, and so forth. So these are, in terms of diversity, these are separate nations, if you like. We are a nation of nations. Manipur, Nagaland. I mean, how many of us know what's going on? How many of us are sharing with and with virtue, we can do it very quickly. But we're not, right? It all takes a Zoom to, so maybe the Trade Promotion Council should do first, more intra-India. So we get prepared to take on the world, because we are a world unto ourselves as well, with language and cultural diversity and so forth. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Buddha, sir, has to leave in 5 to 6 minutes. So I'll just quickly get one answer from him. So companies have often expressed a view that students coming out of colleges are not industry ready and need extensive training. And this can only get more challenging given the rapid proliferation of technology 4.0. So how can colleges address this gap in your view?
It's a very, very interesting question. And another aspect which we must remember is the industrialization is moving so fast that the way they do business is changing on a quarterly basis. So I think how you will accommodate such kind of a fast changes in your education system. I think, this is the biggest challenge. So what we did, we have created one AI deep learning robot called Ping. So we have analyzed more than 160 plus countries, their economies, their GDPs, their current projects, their future projects, what is there coming up, and we have identified 56 future technologies / skills. And that mapped with the various industries, and we started training, skilling, upskilling, reskilling of students on all these 56 technologies for free of cost. So now what happens, let's say I'm more interested on deep learning. So I can simply go and learn this from Microsoft or from IBM, from Google, for free of cost. So what happens now, one side, the advantage for the companies, what we have offered is a win-win situation, is that we said, see, here you have a potential employer. So on the other side, he may be an employee, or he may be a vendor for them, or maybe, on the other side, he may be a researcher for that company. So we are giving a initial connect, between the industry and them. And the second thing is, every industry has something called a gap. So let's say there is a company called X. Suddenly a customer called A said, I need 1,000 resources. Let me, none of the companies has that kind of a bench strength. So where is the bench strength then? The bench strength is our students. So we are preparing, we are making them ready, so that they can fulfill that gap. Maybe not to that level of an expert, but but at least on the entry level, and slowly they will move on, step by step. I think this is another thing we are doing. And as I see one very interesting question, that we have set up incubation centers in various institutes across the country. Is it going to benefit anyone, or is it working successfully? I say yes. I mean, because that's the missing piece in this entire puzzle. So now what is happening, the industry is visiting institutes. And recently, example, 3 days back, we did one company called Juniper Network. We sent all our students, I think more than 1,000 students and faculty, to the company, and they have visited, they looked into it, they were there for 2 to 3 days. So exchange of information, exchange of thought process, exchange of experiences are happening. I think, we are going in the right direction. Slowly, I think, but the only thing I see, because our country is very large. I think we need to do it in a little faster mode with help of the technology. Example, let's say IIT Mumbai is coming up with some kind of a extraordinary innovation. I think that needs to be shared using the technology to a small remote village institute. I think, this is where the NETF is going to play a major role. And we are completely focusing and identified what kind of infrastructure we have, because now we are talking about 5G and what kind of a speed we have in our institutes. Because if I want to access a digital twin of one of the physical device in German, one of the German company, so can I have, or do I have that kind of a infrastructure capabilities in my institute so that my student can access that digital twinning? I think, these kind of a questions what we are trying to answer. I think, now the Ministry of Education is more like a technological company than a Babugiri. So we are well advanced, we understand things much better. And we are talking in terms of, the advanced technologies and, and trying to adopt the 5G. And we understood every student learning patterns are different. Every student is unique. So now we are coming up with a adaptable, personalized and customized learning management systems. Because, every student, the way they learn is different. Example, my learning capability may be through videos. So I learn very quick, if you show me something in video format. Maybe someone else in a textual format, someone is in a research material pattern. I think, we need to first understand what kind of a methodology they adopt fast and give the same content in that format so that, they can adopt it very, very fast. So what we did, we started taking suggestions from different sets of students and faculties of various across the country and trying to create this kind of advanced systems and embedding the artificial intelligence, deep learning, as well as business intelligence. Because that's also very important. It is not that only that one side we are just going to give the infrastructure, but we want to understand this from a business point of view. Where are we moving? What is the progress we are making? What is the delta, we are trying to fulfill? I think these all things, are very important. And one more thing, what we have in national education policy, which was not really implementing what we want to implement, is the hub and spoke model. So let's say there is one of the best institutes or IITs or IIMs nearby. So they can adopt the nearby institutes of not that level and they can start sharing. I think, this is one very big disadvantage in our country that, we always try to hide and, keep everything to our chest. I think this dissemination and sharing of knowledge is going to be a crucial. So I think slowly we are trying to, gather all the people in one place and trying to, exchange ideas, exchange of implementation of NEP from one institute to another institute. What are the strengths, what methodologies they use? Slowly we are trying to adopt all this together. But having said that, it's a long way to go. I completely agree and understand as it's it's a learning what we are doing now. But I see a very bright light in a year or so. Definitely we will, march ahead and at least our efficiency will increase more than 100 to 200% compared to the current scenario. And this ABC is going to be another very path-breaking initiative, because every certification, once the student finishes, it's going to be on the academic bank of credit as well as universal bank of credit. So what happens? You don't need to carry anything, and everything is digitally assigned. So that's again another very forefront, thought process, and all our initiatives like giving scholarships, etc., is going to completely get digitized. So I think, this is kind of a services what government wants to provide and facilitations, so that the student and faculty and institutes will concentrate more on the learning as well as acquiring the knowledge and skills. So these are the kind of models what we are proposing. I apologize to everyone. I need to go for another important meeting. I'm already late. So I wish best of luck to everyone. And please feel free to, contact us. We are very agile in nature, open and ready to accept any kind of, thought process which will make our country as a developed nation. Because, when I was a kid, I heard we are a developing nation. I still hear the developing nation. I think we all know it's a time. I think, we need to transform our country from a developing nation to a developed nation. I see one last question I just answer and move on. Sir, as you saying, students are more keen on attracted towards the developed economies. See, that's where I always say, why the 5 trillion, right? I see that, that 5 trillion, if you see the UPI implementation, I think, we have marched ahead. See, the entire country, every country is depending on the trade and finance and financial services. I think, the UPI is giving that kind of a solution. And I see that other countries are adopting it. It means, we are slowly marching towards a developed nation and developed economy. I'm sure that in a year or so, everyone will start saying India is a developed nation. And now the kind of investments pouring into our country, it will translate into a job opportunities to all our youngsters. I think then they never pay any attention to move out of the country, because in our country we have so many things to enjoy, movies, cricket, I think, whatnot. I think, multiple vibrant colors, festivals, beautiful festivals. I think no one wants to leave this fun. The only thing people are moving out just for the economic financial benefit purpose. If you are getting 10 to 20% below, but you are going to get the rest of the things in place, I'm sure, they will stay in our country and they will try to do more development, towards the villages as well as towards the tribal areas, which is very important. I'm sure the youngsters will do it. I thank everyone for giving this opportunity. Namaste.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sharing your insights. Anyone who wants to add to Mr. Chandrasekhar's viewpoints, so please, you are welcome to do so.
Just a couple of quick points, although I've spoken a lot already. One is to do with one challenge, I think, which is staring us globally in the face, which is climate change. That's an emergency. And in Delhi, for example, where I've lived all my life, I was born here, it's been the most weird summer I ever remember. Most unpredictable weather. And that's happening many parts of this country. So whether the monsoon will come on time or not, and that will impact everything. There's so much. So I think that's a global problem. And I think at the education universities, at university level, even at school level, we need to sensitize all our students in terms of saving on natural resources. This is not just a production problem. This is also a consumption pattern problem. So whether you switch off the fan or you buy clothes and don't change them every now and then because they're no longer in fashion. So while we become richer, unless we take care of our environment, we won't become richer. The environmental limits will defeat us. So I think, and of course, research, whether it's IITs or Institute of Science, how best to have sustainable source of energy, more sustainable production pattern. I think this should be now in mission mode. It's an emergency. And so not everything is equally important. I teach strategy, and strategy basically says priorities. And I think this is a priority for every institution in all of the world, including in India. And the other only aspect I wanted to conclude on the pedagogy part, there's a huge difference between information, knowledge, and intelligence. This is the information age. But in a sense, you could always have gone to a library. If you want to become a doctor or engineer, go to a library, it's full of books, read them up, give an exam. All that has happened, those books now on the net, right? But they've always been there. But that's not how you become a doctor or an engineer or a manager, right? Books are there, read it. To internalize information, to make that knowledge of your own, and to exercise your own brain, which is intelligence, they are very different things. So the pedagogy of education systems is not just information acquisition. So it's not just going to be solved by creating digital networks and putting videos up. There are already enough videos. There's Khan Academy, there's higher education videos all over. It's not going to do it. You still have to come together. There'll have to be discipline. There has to be classrooms where you ask questions. You look at body language, you look at each other's eyes, you discuss. There's a whole discipline of learning. It's not the same thing as information. And I think we need to be careful on that, not get carried away just by digital technologies. Use them, but they're not going to be sufficient. So I just wanted to make those 2 points. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So my next question is for Sanjiv, sir. Please share your views on how students in India can improve their skill development through focus on practical applications.
Okay, so this is it's a very important aspect. My answer is that this process of skill development should start at a very early age. I think, in my opinion, undergrad itself is a very late stage, because when any student is developing or any child is developing talent, this usually happens during the growing phase when they are learning things. And unfortunately, in India, at least if you look at the school education system, there's a lot of emphasis on languages. Okay, now, yes, we are all very proud of our languages. There is, if you look at the kids now, they learn English, which is probably the most common mode of scientific communication. And then they have to learn a national language, and they have to probably learn a regional language, and so on. And they spend a lot of time. So I will not debate that. I mean, this is not the platform for it. But irrespective of what happens, high school onwards is a time where a student should start developing actual skills, in the sense, can the student understand basic electronics and build circuit boards? Now, this is not a very hard skill. Kids do many more dangerous things and many more exciting things. But this is a fundamental skill. Can a child do, let's say, plumbing? Do they understand wiring systems in a home? Do they understand, how their transport works? How does a car work? When I say understand, I do not mean a bookish knowledge. I mean by actually looking into it and working with it. Okay, now, this skill, if it begins to develop by the time a student reaches high school and maybe goes on till your 12th grade, your 12th standard, a student leaving school, he or she will they will have a significant amount of expertise to begin contributing to the economy. Even if a child cannot, let's say due to financial reasons, cannot progress more and develop an undergraduate, have an undergraduate education, they can at least earn a livelihood for themselves. Okay, so I think schools themselves should bring a child to this level where you can start doing basic, where you can start contributing in a very meaningful way to the economy. And of course, expertise will come with practice. But apart from this is all the practical side of things, and that has to keep growing. Okay, now, for some reason, engineering students that I meet know very little about how a house is wired, electrical wiring in a house, or they cannot do, let's say, they are not very good at soldering a PC board, or they're not very good at plumbing, or they're not very good at carpentry. Now, I would sincerely question that kind of engineering education. Okay, because these hands-on skills are very important. But putting that aside, okay, that's one very important aspect that's completely missing, and that's the heart of any entrepreneurship or technology development that has to happen in a country. Two other things. Okay, one is the knowledge base itself. Okay, now when you come to an engineering institute or a scientific institute, you're expected to have a very strong understanding of basic physics, basic math. And I think because a lot of it is taught in a very short amount of time, it not only stresses the student, it pushes the student away from these areas. And these students are very likely doing what they are doing, not because they love it, but because they have nothing else to do. Again, I will not speak for all students. There is a statistics here. So a student in engineering, that may not be his or her, place to be. They are not personally interested in it. Okay, but they are there doing it. Okay, but now, why are they doing it? Because there are no opportunities, so as to say, in other areas. But I would also argue that now even engineers do not have opportunities. I mean, yes, we all know about industry having to hire talent, but you will find that there is very little R&D happening in any industry. So what does a PhD in engineering do in India? they have nothing. They don't have many opportunities. There are very far and few opportunities for a PhD or a master's student in India in engineering. So I think the point I'm trying to make is you develop the skills so that you create the opportunities. You need to have this technology translation and entrepreneurship environment, which becomes the engine of growth for India. When a student graduates, the mentality now is when a student graduates, they look for, okay, which company can they join, right? They are they are looking for employment. Okay, is it Intel or is it TI or is it whatnot? But they don't understand that those companies came by, they were born because of a different kind of mindset. And if that mindset is gone, then you do not have any jobs. So you need to be job creators. You need to be the people who are engaging with society and developing jobs. And that comes with these skills. So very short, first is a mindset change, right? You need to be more curious. You need to be switching from a mode where you're looking for employment to you creating new things and therefore creating employment. That's a mindset change. That's the first skill to develop. All right. And within that comes creativity, patience, not giving up, and all that's a personality trait. And I think that's the first thing. So I would say honesty, hard work, sincerity, these personality traits are the core. And after that comes your knowledge base, right? I need to be really good at math. I need to be really good at physics, or whatever the domain I'm working with, right? I need to have that knowledge, and you take your time to develop that knowledge. But again, here I'll blame the school system. I'll be outright here. I think a lot of it is taught in very little time, which is very discouraging for a student. And then comes the hands-on skill development, okay, which is, it could be coding, it could be programming a microcontroller board, or it should, but students should not run away from doing very hard hands-on work. I mean, they are young. They should be very hands-on. I mean, in the sense, they should know carpentry, they should know plumbing, they should know electrical wiring. It's very funny when an electrical engineer from, let's say, an IIT cannot fix something wrong in his home, right? So it could be dangerous, but they should know what's the problem. So I think these three aspects. First is the mindset change in a student, and that has to happen at a very young stage. That cannot happen because there are financial pressures, I understand, but all that has to be integrated and thought out at a very young stage. The second is developing core skills. Pay a lot of attention to fundamentals of your maths that you're learning. It's very important. I do not know why there is, at least when I was a student, there was a time when if you wanted to go into the medicine stream, you need not take mathematics or something like that. But that I find it very absurd. Nature has no boundaries between science and engineering. Everybody should learn everything, and they should learn it very well. Maybe a smaller portion of it, but understand it very well. So core science and math, and then hands-on skill, which I believe should begin from a high school stage. And that's when a student actually develops talent and becomes somebody who's very good at doing many things. Okay, so this is my opinion, but I mean, it's a different task to actually implement it probably.
Yes, sir, Praveen, sir, please.
Yeah, if I may just add to Mr. Sanjiv, we run a tribal school in the on the fringes of the Bandipur forest. We have had a couple of very interesting experiences, like, connected to what you mentioned. We run a course called Introduction to Basic Technology, and all grades from grade 6 are part of that course. They learn agriculture, they learn carpentry, they learn tailoring, and there is no gender bias or stereotyping there. So tailoring, both girls and boys learn. The course was, when it was introduced, the people who opposed it were all the parents. It's not the attitude of the students, actually attitude of the parents, who think that there is a sort of a stereotyping, or you're pushing these kids into a particular type of jobs. To sort of demonstrate a connection between what they learn at school to what is relevant for their local economy. we took up an initiative called community project. So every fortnight on a Tuesday afternoon, these kids would go into a tribal village and identify what would the small challenges were, and they would address them. So in one of the village, during the just before the pandemic, they fixed rainwater harvesting systems for all the houses in that village. During the pandemic, there was a village right next to our school. It's called Hosahalli, where these kids observed that in the evenings, these gents in the village would hang two wires from the power supply lines. So that's illegal power supply that they would be drawing, and it's very quite unsafe as well. So we got these kids to write letters to the Karnataka Electricity Board, provide them with legal connections, and within each of these houses, do the wiring for one bulb, one fan, and a plug point in 54 households. Now, at the end of this entire exercise, we saw that the kids had a better understanding of what it takes to be what we aspire for. So there were a couple of people who came back to me saying that they wanted to become an electrical engineer, but they actually understood what it takes to be an electrical engineer or what it means to be an electrical engineer. Some of them have gone back to become farmers. They continued, they didn't pursue formal education beyond 10th standard, but they are very good at what they do because they understand, they have understood agriculture the scientific way. So they decide based on weather patterns and so on. So it is mostly that thinking, and I do agree with the fact that these should be introduced much early. And it's also unfortunate that engineering is nowadays devoid of these hands-on skills. How much ever I cursed IIT for having the workshop in our first 2 semesters, looking back, that was a great experience to be in the foundry, to be in the fitting workshop and sweating in Chennai. So that experience of being an engineer, if that could be introduced into schools and engineering colleges, I think it would go a long way. One such opportunity is an internship. However, internships are also sort of being reduced to making presentations and desk jobs. But if they can, if just by being in a workplace, being in meetings and understand how decisions are taken. If you go to a shop floor, understand how the metal is cut. There's a great learning there. And
Yes.
if internships can be brought down to that rigor, I'm sure we'll go a long way in bringing up the necessary skills.
Very happy to hear that, Praveen, regarding this program. That's sort of exactly what I'm mentioning. I mean, that's what I'm highlighting here. That is completely missing in our traditional school system.
Yeah.
And I think the broader point is that education must be a joyous affair. Classrooms should be fun, full of joy, curiosity, learning, togetherness, not just hyper competition to crack an exam and then get some high-paid salary, which rest of India can't afford at least, and then make the coons of your careers, right? So it's a very different approach. I mean, not set out separately from life. Life is integral to what we do.
Learning is a part of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think Krishnamurti used to say that education is the attempt to awaken human intelligence so that it flowers in goodness. The attempt to awaken human intelligence so that it flowers in goodness. And if there's goodness, there's joy, there's affection. So bringing the mind, heart, body together is integral. You can't live schizophrenic lives. That is a recipe for disaster, environmentally and also in the human psyche. Then we become artificial. We'll all become AI. The danger is not from AI. The danger is we are becoming AI.
We're becoming slaves to numbers.
Yeah.
So I must add here, this. So I think our whole education system is, the end goal is to rank students, and that entire mentality should go. That's the cause of all the paranoia among students, and I completely understand. I mean, I have been a student. I mean, it's a rat race. the whole process of ranking, comparing one student with another should completely vanish.
Yes.
I think the goal should be focused on optimizing what everybody has learned,
Yeah.
as opposed to how you judging one candidate with respect to another, and that really it's a psychological blow to the student. It pushes them away. It does not make learning fun, and they
Yeah.
do not become contributing members of society, and therefore industry has no talent.
Yes.
That is why when these students go outside the country, they find some semblance of what they were looking for, some kind of peace, and that's the attraction. Right?
So the irony is, competition versus cooperation. Constantly competition is what's talked about. But we say trust, collaboration, all that is important. But what really takes the forefront is competition. And in economics, markets are competition, but organizations are places where you do teamwork. Organizations are not markets where you cooperate, and we've forgotten that. Our human body itself is an organism. If the heart started competing with the brain and the brain with the kidney, right, we'd be in trouble. And in fact, the moment a single cell competes and says, my family is more important than other cells, it's called cancer. So there's perfect cooperation within the human body. That's why it's called not just an organization, it's an organism. And that's sane and that's healthy. So some competition is fine. I mean, it's healthy competition, it's playful. So when you play badminton, you're cooperating by competing because you're testing out your skills. And you're trying to beat the other, but it's actually cooperation. You're having fun. It's not the Russia-Ukraine war. It's fun. So all debate must be dialogue. When debates become acrimonious and ego-based, you were talking about silence of the mind. So yes, only in the silence of the mind, which is a meditative mind, can knowledge come, can affection come, and can the planet probably flower.
Absolutely. And also the focus on more open-ended problems. So in school and in education, in engineering, the kind of questions I would say, or what the student is tested for is, okay, here is something, and then give me the answer. Right? That's not how the world works. And then they step into a world where, okay, you have to ask the question. So they're not taught. They're taught to give the right answers, but not ask the right questions. And I think that bridge comes from trying to solve practical open-ended problems, open-ended designs where there are many creative ideas and many possible right answers. And these sort of things need to be incorporated into the education system in some manner. We try to do it in our local exams and tests. Personally, I give a take-home test where the student can use the internet, they can use books, they can do all that. And then they come back with answers to design problems. But it should happen at a much younger stage. It should happen. I would largely blame the school system. By the time school system takes very young, intelligent, creative children and sort of confines them into this very rigorous, torturous conduit, and then sends them out into higher education. And we want the child. We do not want the morphed individual here.
So that was a great discussion we had. So lastly, we'll take some questions from the audience. So right now, some of the Indian universities are, in the procedure of tying up with the foreign universities. So how would this help Indian universities come up in the global rankings, if anyone would like to answer?
I will take a shot at it. It's again going to be through interdisciplinary collaboration. So if I were to connect the very first question with this, right, I think a lot to do with global rankings and image promotion. All that is fine, but this is before all that should happen, there should be something meaningful done, right? There is no point promoting a brand when you're actually not doing something interesting. The core aspects of any university is teaching, good research, and collaborations with foreign universities encourages, movement of students, as Dr. Vivek was saying, we can also do, let alone foreign universities. I think it's a good point that we should first start this within India itself. So that movement of students will allow for movement of knowledge, which will allow us to see things from the other person's eyes, and all that can lead to interesting solutions. And I see it as a pathway to interesting teaching methods, interesting research, and which will result in outcomes that will improve global rankings. It should not be a market game where I'm advertising without having content. That doesn't work. That doesn't stay for too long. So the very first question on brand promotion, yes, image is important, I would say. But behind that image, there should be a very strong foundation laid by the research and teaching and the students produced by that university. Right? Without that, brand promotion will not work. It will not last for too long.
And one more thing is, all these rankings are very relative, right? I mean, I would rather be the last rank in a bunch of very good universities than be rank one in a bunch of hopeless universities. So I don't think we should get carried away with this entire concept of ranking, but the results will follow. I mean, but the focus should be on what we deliver to our students, and then what the students are further able to deliver or do their bit to the globe. And our rankings will definitely follow.
And just to add, I think ranking is a deeply imperfect process. Teaching can hardly get assessed, which is the primary job. How do you assess teaching? I mean, student feedback is not a way of assessing teaching. Do you send inspectors in? So teaching takes a backseat. Research, again, I mean, is it really relevant, or is it just number of papers? So all these are very relative things. But we must remember that this is a part, I mean, education is becoming a business in the world. And ranking is one way you improve your brand image. And so you invest in rankings. I mean, and the system is not necessarily conducive to the way developing countries' universities are ranked for all kinds of reasons. But simply because you're in the top rank, you can attract students, which is money, right? So it's like a credit rating agency, right? And the way the rules of the credit rating agency and the rules, and I don't think India has much input into the way the Times Higher Education or any other of these rankings happen. That's a world unto itself. So it's not a simple exercise. There are all kinds of economic implications. So we should not get too carried away. So yes, we can use some of this stuff and it can help us. But if we get limited by it, then that's problematic.
Thank you, sir. We'll quickly take one last question, which is how do you view the impact of privatization in education and its impact on the society, and what role can regulation play to ensure that the quality is not compromised? Vivek, sir.
Well, all right. Okay. It depends on how, so I think private versus public. It depends on how the private sector takes on this challenge. There's a great information asymmetry, both in education and health, between the supplier and the buyer. So as a result, traditionally, both in health and education, and also on equity considerations, this has been largely a task that the state initially took up because the externalities, I mean, the equity issues, and also, as we've been saying, rankings are imperfect and so on. There's information asymmetry. How does a student judge whether you're giving a great class or not? He doesn't know enough. How does a patient judge whether the doctor is the best medical service provider? He should go to another doctor. So there are great market imperfections, if you like. And as a result, the state has played a big role. I think that role in a country like ours must continue. It's not something we should give away to the private sector. Having said that, there's no reason why the private sector cannot also complement the efforts of the state. And yet, be careful, so there are all kinds of private institutions. There are universities which are just teaching shops. Not much research happens there. The teachers are not paid very well. There are, on the other hand, there are private universities which are doing very well. So I think it's not so much public versus private as to the quality of the education that's being imparted. I think that is important. But I don't think the state should shy away from its responsibility in a country, especially like India, where a lot of people who might come from poor backgrounds cannot afford the kind of payments that the private sector will demand. Education is an expensive business. Even the IMs are taking something like 20-25 lakhs, and so forth. Not every person is capable of dishing out that kind of money. So I think the state must carry on with its responsibilities.
Yeah, and for the last question, I think, can industry come forward to create a course syllabus? I think it'll be great if that can happen, but I don't know. That has to be happening in a much more organized way. Probably the industry here needs to be defined very properly.
In fact, CBSE has been sort of experimenting this. So they have from grade 9 onwards what are called as skill papers, which is not the the mainstream, the 5 subjects board exams, but there is an additional optional subject which the students can choose from. There is a flexibility for the actually right now regulated by CBSE, but for the student to choose from. And there is a curriculum which is at least what they claim to be industry relevant today. So all of us can definitely contribute to that. But what becomes more important there is also a financial viability aspect to it. Not every school can offer all the options there. So again, students will sort of get split across multiple subjects. So if this was available through an open schooling platform where you could choose from, let's say from an open school, I'll choose one subject. Through the regular CBSE, I would choose 4 subjects. Then maybe something like would definitely would work.
I think there's technological snag here. Talk about technology. I think the people from the Trade Promotion Council are no longer here. So maybe they're having trouble getting back in. So perhaps we can bring this to a conclusion. I think we've had a great discussion, and all of us have really enjoyed it, and the questions have been very interesting. So I'm sure these are things we'd like to take up in the future. But it's been a pleasure to be both with Sanjiv and Praveen and Raja. It was a real pleasure. And also,
likewise, Dr. Vivek. Very nice to meet you, Praveen. Nice to meet you, and Buddha. I think he left. And I think I should thank Ashima in her absence probably for hosting us.
Yes. Thanks, Ashima, and all the Trade Promotion Council for doing this, and hope to have further sessions.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, great. Okay, so let's bring this to a close then. Yes.
Yes.
Good. Thank you. Bye-bye.